Hello everyone and welcome to Mochi Doki Mochi episode 12. So last week in episode 11 I spoke about how I was working on a video on the Seinen magazine Hata and how I was reading a bunch of their manga to try and give people an impression of what the magazine has to offer. Like I said before, I found Hata to be just an utter treasure trove of really cool manga. And so I decided to continue reading a lot of them. So today I would like to start off with talking about two of these manga, the first being Kirakira to Giragira. So this is a seinen romance comedy manga created by Arashida Sawako. The title is onomatopoeia for sparkling and dazzling, but it also has an English title, which is My Destiny Romance with Violence. I read the first volume and right off the bat, I just have to say that this was such an incredibly funny and good read. The manga follows Himeji Ruru, who looks like she just stepped out of a shoujo manga. She attends the Kirakira Academy, which translates to the Sparkling Academy, but due to her father's work, she has to move and transfer from school. And so all of her classmates and friends stand at the station to wave her goodbye with their dazzling shoujo eyes. However, her warm goodbye from her old school is just miles and miles away from the cold welcome she receives at Gokumon High School. Because as Ruru takes a step into her new classroom, she finds that it is filled to the brim with delinquents. What's more is that they all look completely different from her, not only in terms of clothing, but they're actually drawn in the style of Gekiga manga. So this is a manga style that, aesthetically speaking, is characterized by dark hashing, grainy lines, and sharp angles. So think something like Fist of the North Star or JoJo's Part 1 manga aesthetics. Ruru learns that Gokumon High School is actually just a normal school. The thing is that the school's name translates to Prison Gate High School. And this name is exactly what attracted delinquents from all over Japan to enroll, turning it into a prestigious school for delinquents to attend. Now, Ruru eventually gets assigned a seat at the back of the class, next to what seems to be a particularly scary guy. It turns out that his name is Gokurakuji Zen, and he's actually the top delinquent of the school after having beaten the shit out of the last two who were fighting to become top dog. Surprisingly, Ruru recognizes him as her childhood friend and former neighbor Zen. It's then revealed that when they were younger, Zen moved away, leaving Ruru's perfectly sweet shoujo world behind and eventually turned into a full-blown delinquent. What's more is that Zen gives Ruru the cold shoulder when she makes any attempt to reach out to him. And so the manga follows Ruru as she struggles to reconcile her past image of Zen with who he is now, as she at the same time tries to figure out what exactly she feels for him. I honestly love everything about this manga. This is such a good manga. Like, just the idea is so unique and good. Like, it's so good. Like, I can't count how many times the manga caught me off guard and had me in absolute stitches. It were often the subtle things that really got me, like the view of Ruru's neighborhood, where you can see Ruru's pristine shoujo manga house being surrounded by dilapidated Geki-style houses. Or when Ruru is describing Zen over the phone to one of her old friends, she conjures up an image of Zen as a total Ottoman-style guy. For me, the juxtaposition of the serious Gekiga style with the classic shoujo style alone was already enough to make this manga so utterly hilarious. But Arashida is also such a good storyteller with a great sense of comedic timing, which really elevates the quality of this manga. And of course, I have to mention the range of Arashida is absolutely insane. They showcase such a high level of artistic mastery by brilliantly capturing the essence of both styles so well. Like, it's so impressive to me. So after the main premise is set, we start to get an idea of how the rest of the series is going to progress. Aside from the romantic aspect between Zen and Ruru, it's looking like both characters are going to have to deal with a lot of situations at school. As you might already be able to tell, Gokumon High School is not an easy school to attend. And Zen is at the top of the food chain, so there are constantly people scheming in order to take over his position. What's more is that Zen's position also makes him the most attractive guy at school. He, however, doesn't show interest in any of the girls. And actually, at school, he doesn't talk to anyone at all. So, as you can imagine, when Ruru tries to get close to him, and specifically when she calls him by his first name, that aggravates a lot of delinquent girls. And that's how she gets a target on her back very early on. And what's so fun about all these rivalries is that the characters that are after Zen and Ruru are so extreme. For instance, for the crime of calling Zen by his first name, Ruru gets threatened with razor blades and a fist with knives sticking out of it. Now, one thing that really warms my heart with this manga is just the appreciation and respect shown by Arashida for both styles/genres. That is something I felt really shines through. Gekiga manga is considered to be a more serious form of manga, and so in general it is more respected than shoujo manga. And so putting them next to each other, showcasing both of their qualities and what a great story can be created by combining them is something I find to be infinitely cool. I found myself absolutely mesmerized by the beautiful depictions of Gekiga art and how charmingly Arashida draws the characters in this style, especially the women. And at the same time, I was just squealing because of the romance aspect of the story. Like, I'm already so invested in this potential relationship. Also, I just really love Ruru as a character. She's kind of like the classic shoujo MC. Very sweet, but also at the same time brave and determined. She's also kind of dramatic, which is absolutely hilarious. Like, there are moments when she's worried and she does, the classic fist over the heart and looking concerned look. And that shit saddened me so hard. But yeah, the last thing that I wanted to talk about was the whole thing about Zen ignoring Ruru. Ruru herself doesn't quite understand why he's doing this, and neither does the reader actually, because for the first 5 chapters, there's no introspect about Zen and the reasons for his behavior, and that was something that really created suspense for me. I really wanted to find out what was going on, and then finally, in the last chapter of the volume, we get some insight on Zen. We get to see how when he first moved to this neighborhood, he experienced the same shock as Ruri. He also had a really hard time surviving at school because he was very weak and so he got targeted. And then one day when he arrives back home from school, he finds that his parents have now turned into Gekiga style people. And so he's just utterly horrified. But what keeps him going is Ruru's memory. And so that's how he managed to keep on fighting and surviving these past 10 years. And so we find out that the reason that he's avoiding Ruru is because he doesn't want her to change like everyone else does when they move to town. And this is the moment in which he imagines Gekiga Ruru, and I literally died. Like, she looked so bad. Like, it was absolutely hilarious. And yeah, I think I've said enough about this manga for today. This one was just too good not to give an entire breakdown of. Then another manga that I read from Hata was Koroshiya no Oshi by Oshima Rintaro. This is actually the most recent series that debuted in their magazine, so I was only able to read about 50 or so pages of this one. But yeah, I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to talk about it. So this is an action comedy manga centering around a man by the name of Endo Owaru. Owaru works for this giant Japanese syndicate called Fujiyama Kai, and with the nickname Fujiyama's Murder Machine, he's the best assassin in the business. Now, as you can imagine, the life of a cold-blooded killing machine isn't particularly wholesome and bright. However, Owaru has found something worth living for, the shining light in his darkness. and that is Kaorin, one of the members of the idol group Rosasea. She's Owaru's favorite idol, and he has therefore been supporting her by doing things like going to her concerts and going to her meet and greets. However, during one of those meet and greets, Kaorin offers to shake Owaru's hand. He, however, feels that his hands that are stained with the blood of the people he has killed are just too dirty for her to touch, and so that's when he decides that he wants to give up his job as an assassin. Surprised and mildly disgusted by the fact that Owaru has feelings, his boss lets him go, and so Owaru starts working at Whackdonald's so that he can support Kaorin using money that he has earned in a less harmful way. And then one day while he's at his job, he finds that Kaorin has been kidnapped by another crime syndicate right before one of her performances. So Kaorin is not a target because she's Owaru's shining light, but rather because she's the daughter of the current prime minister, a man who previously had ties to some really shady people who he then cut off right before securing his position as prime minister. And so now they're out for revenge. Now, obviously, Kaorin's kidnapping doesn't fly with Owaru, and so he ends up beating the absolute crap out of these bad guys, after which he himself attends the concert. And that's basically everything that happens in the first 50 pages. They're actually freely available on the Hata website, so I will leave a link to that in the description box below if you're interested yourself in taking a look. I honestly had such a good time reading this manga. It reminded me of The Way of the House Husband, but with a lot more action. For me, it's just the contrast between a cold-blooded killer showing up at an idol concert with, like lightsabers that just takes me out. Like the first couple of pages, you see Owaru leaving behind an absolute massacre, and that is quickly followed up with a panel of him enthusiastically screaming, "Kaorin!" at one of her concerts and doing like the group's idol sign, which is like this, I think. So yeah, it just seems like this is going to be a really funny manga. Now, aside from the comedy, there is a lot of action. At the beginning of this chapter, we only get to see the aftermath of what Owaru is capable of. But at the end, we actually get to see him at work, and that was just so cool to see. The panels of him beating up the bad guys are incredibly dynamic and very thrilling to look at, in my opinion. Also, one thing that I'm really excited about here is that it doesn't seem like this is going to be a slice of life manga. And that's because I think that there are a lot of aspects of this manga that are worth developing, such as Owaru's personality, his relationship with Kaorin, Kaorin's father's shady past. So I'm really excited to see where this manga will head towards. I'll probably give an update on this manga in the latter half of the year, as that's a rough estimate of when this manga's first volume will be released. But yeah, with regards to the actual Hata video that I was working on, I managed to film it and it went quite well, so I'm now just in the editing process, so hopefully I'll be able to upload that very soon. But yeah, I'm just really happy with how things are going. In any case, in the video I also happened to mention Aokishi, which is a sister magazine of Hata. To me, this magazine in particular is really interesting because it is run by a team consisting of editors from 4 different manga magazines at Kadokawa. 2 of these magazines, including Hata, are Seinen, one is Shoujo, and another is Josei. And so instead of targeting one specific demographic, this manga is just really concerned with introducing readers to manga from all sorts of genres. It was pointed out in Aokishi's announcement article on the Kadokawa website 2 years ago how reading manga magazines focused on one specific demographic or a specific genre as a result makes one read a lot of the same things. So this is a fairly new magazine. The first issue came out in April of 2021, and so I decided to get every issue during the last sale on Bookwalker, not sponsored. And so aside from following the stories in Hata, I'll now also be doing the same for Aokishi. As of now, there are only 3 manga that have ended in this magazine, and I'm interested in reading 2 of them. One was created by Chida Nao, and having checked out the rest of their work, I found that they are associated with Asuka, the shoujo magazine that works with Aokishi. So Chida made a mystery manga that was published in Asuka back in 2021, and I ended up reading that one first. So the title is Eden Kyouju no Yuugana Kyuujitsu, and it also has an English title which is The Elegant Holiday of Professor Eden. So this is a one-shot about a university professor by the name of James or Jim Eden. The manga opens with him packing up his things after a lecture when he gets approached by a janitor asking if he's done for the day. Eden tells him that his daughters are returning home for the holiday, but then when he arrives at his house, he opens the door to a room filled with a buttload of guns, and he's like, my cute daughters. And that's when he starts to clean and repair a bunch of guns that have been used for violent crimes. It turns out that aside from being a professor, Eden also happens to be a gunsmith and arms dealer who provides and repairs guns for people in the underworld during his holidays. And so every chapter covers one holiday where he brushes shoulders with lots of really shady people. This was an interesting read for me, but despite this being a shoujo manga, it was surprisingly hard for me to understand. And that's because the characters frequently speak using metaphors, and that made it a lot trickier for me to read, because I didn't know whether I was just misreading the text or if I was actually right and that the meaning behind the text was just not straightforward. For instance, at the start of the manga, Eden speaks to this mafia guy and they start talking about cigarettes and whether or not Eden has a particular brand he likes. And I was just so confused. I was like, why are they discussing cigarette brands for like 7 pages? But then a week or 2 later, I circled back to this moment and it turned out that they were actually talking about where Eden's loyalty as a gunsmith and arms dealer lies. But yes, I ended up reading this one twice, which definitely made me appreciate the story more and understand better what it was trying to do. So I think I said this before, but every chapter is called a holiday, so like holiday 1, holiday 2, etc, etc. And this format threw me off a bit because it initially made me assume that this was just a slice of life about a bad guy. But there's actually an underlying story throughout the manga. At the start of the manga, we learn that there's a senator by the name of Carlos Beliz who has aggravated the D'Antoni mafia family as he's interfering with their business endeavors for his own benefit. This conflict starts a war in the underworld in which Eden finds himself in the middle of, as he refuses to align himself with any particular group. As a result of this stance, he gets targeted, and so each chapter we get to see how Eden plays his cards in this situation. I enjoyed this story. It's always really nice to read shoujo manga that belongs to a genre that isn't the most popular. I also really like Chida's art style. Their illustrations have a very clean look with a heavy use of black and greys with thick black outlines which are contrasted with a white halo that encapsulates the characters and objects. But if anything, I'm now even more excited to try out Chida's manga that was published in Aokishi. It's called Hotel Lilac and it's a supernatural one-shot about a man who runs an elegant hotel business together with the ghost of his grandfather. It looks really promising, so I hope to be able to read it soon and feature it on the podcast. As for the second manga from Aokishi that I want to read, This one is called Namima no Kodomotachi, with the English title of Children in the Ocean Time of Life. It's a drama one-shot about a girl who, after losing her family, is struggling in life. Then one night she decides to throw herself into the ocean when she finds a shining man stranded on the shoreline, and he claims that he's an alien. It sounds really interesting to me, and I've already seen a number of panels of this manga, so I already know that at the very least visually it looks really good. But yeah, seeing how much fun I had working on the Hata video, I think I might also do the same for Aokishi actually, especially since it's such a new magazine that doesn't really publish a lot of big names. But yeah, do you still remember Kemutai Ane to Tsurui Imoto? It's the manga I discussed back in episode 10 about those two sisters, with one of them being married to the other's ex-boyfriend and them now all just living together. Ever since I started reading this manga, I've just been craving to read more of these messy drama romance stories, and so I figured that the most logical thing to do was to check out Kiss, which Kemutai Ane is published in. And that is how I found Watashi no Aishta Haha no Koibito by Suno Yukiko. The title translates to My Beloved Mother's Lover. And to make things clear, it's not the mother who is beloved, it's the lover of the mother that's beloved, if that makes any sense. Yeah, I just think I should explain the story. So the main character is Chigusa, who hasn't seen her mother called Itsuki in 13 years. At the start of the manga, Itsuki has died from cancer, and so Chigusa attends the funeral. Afterwards, when she goes to her mother's place to rest, she finds that her mother's last lover is already there. And he's basically like, "What? So you think you can just walk in here not talking to your mom for so long and just collect everything she's left behind? Yeah, not happening, bruh." So it turns out that Itsuki gave her lover the house right before she died, and so it's not Chigusa's to inherit anymore. The dude's name is Soshi, by the way. He tells her that despite all of this, she is still free to stay here for a couple of days. And as you can imagine, Chisuga is not very fond of him at all at this point. We eventually learn more about Chisuga and her childhood. Apparently, Itsuki had her at the age of 18, and so Chisuga spent most of her time alone at home as her grandparents and mother were working. Additionally, her mother didn't really want to raise her, and so she never showed up for things in Chisuga's life, and that's the main reason as to why they didn't have any contact. The same night of the funeral, Soshi gets drunk whilst watching a movie as he tries to process the death of Itsuki when Chisuga walks into the room. Soshi mistakes her for Itsuki and kisses her, and after realizing that mistake, he starts crying about how much he misses her. And so here's the deal. For some reason, Chisuga is so moved by this display of him crying and just being so utterly disarmed that she becomes infatuated with him. And so now all of a sudden, she wants to know this person who loved her mother this much that he's crying. And so she basically offers to be his rebound. And so Soshi eventually is like, "I don't know how long you'll stay here, but I'm happy." Oh, yeah. I ended up only reading the first chapter because it was free on the Kiss website, and I was just put off by the first 40 plus pages that I wasn't willing to pay for the second chapter to see how the manga would further develop. Like, I love me some mess, but this was just so cringe. I mean, really? Wanting to sleep with your mother's lover right after her funeral? Really? Especially after he literally taunted you over taking your inheritance a couple of hours ago. Like, girl, please, have some self-respect. Anyway, as you can imagine, me being able to tell you so much of the plot in just the first chapter kind of shows the pacing of this manga, which is breakneck speed. Like, there was not even a single chance for me to start liking any of the two main characters before they started jumping each other's bones. I personally had expected this to be a bit more complex with a lot of character building, but that really doesn't seem to be the case, which is an absolute shame because I felt that the premise had a lot of potential to really dive into interesting themes such as grief, abandonment, difficult familial relationships, etc. But yeah, I guess it just wasn't meant to be. And maybe that manga already exists and I just have to find it. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm pretty sure that I have some kind of fricked up romance manga saved in my checklist on Bookwalker. The list, however, does contain over 500 manga, so it would take a bit of time for me to wade through all of that, but I will report back as soon as I found something else spicy. So in the last episode, I also spoke about some vintage manga I wanted to buy and how there were two mangaka that I really wanted to get some pieces of. I spoke about one of them last week, and so today I'll tell you a bit about the other mangaka today, which happens to be Morikawa Kumi. So she's a mangaka who started her career towards the end of the 70s, mostly writing historical and drama manga. And just like Matsuzaki Akemi, I found her work in the Be Shonen information booklet that I own, and her character designs were something that really struck my eye. Now, I found that aside from all the historical and drama manga, she also created at least one horror manga by the name of Celluloid Dreaming, published in 1984. And when I saw the cover of the first volume, I was like, yeah, I've got to get this one. I just really like the 80s aesthetic. Unfortunately, however, not a single piece of Morikawa's work has been digitized, with her most recent work dating all the way back to 2011. So the only way to get her work would be by buying second-hand copies of it. And I managed to find one single set of this 2-volume series that was available. And just like with last week's manga, there was very meager information available on the internet, but I managed to find the synopsis that was written on the cover. So the story centers around the murder of a Japanese antique dealer in the streets of Hong Kong. His body is discovered by a mysterious Chinese boy called Shannon, and he approaches the daughter of the antique dealer in order to clear her from the crime. And that is all I know. I would love to read this one, and having taken a good amount of time to think about it, I decided to just go ahead and buy this one and the one I spoke about previously as well. I'm also getting about 3 or more volumes of other manga that has gone out of print, and I'm going to try and read them before I head over to Japan, because otherwise it would feel like a bit of a waste to have shipped them all the way here just to leave them at home for over 6 months, or worse, take them back with me to Japan. But yeah, back in episode 9 or so, I believe, I spoke about not really being all that interested in the anime that was getting released for the winter 2023 season. But the other day, I found another manga I'm going to try and watch. It's called Kori Zokusei Danshi to Kuruna Dojo Joshi. The English title is The Ice Guy and His Cool Female Colleague. This is an anime adaptation of a josei manga by Tonogaya Miyuki, which I actually had my eyes on for a couple of months, so it turned out to be a really nice surprise seeing it in the lineup. I'm actually quite confused how I managed to overlook this one when I first looked at the list of Winter 23 anime. Anyway, the story follows Himuro, who happens to be a descendant of the Yuki Onna, or Snow Woman, a yokai from Japanese folklore. And so whenever he feels some sort of deep emotion, he turns his surroundings into a freezer. And then there's also Fuyutsuki, an eccentric but kind co-worker worker of Himuro, who he has feelings for. And so the manga and anime are about how Himuro tries to win over Fuyutsuki, who seems to be kind of oblivious to his feelings. I watched the trailer, which I'll leave a link to in the description box, and yeah, it seemed to be really cute and promising. The first episode came out on the 4th of this month, so I'll try and watch it and report back next week. As for other anime at the time, I think I'm just going to watch some older works or maybe a movie here and there. I figured it would be a good thing to do more listening since I've so heavily focused on reading since December. And now it's time for the question segment of this podcast, Mochi Doki Mochi questions. So if you have a question for me, or if you would like to receive a special manga recommendation, you can leave a question in the comment section below with the hashtag MDMQ, and I will try to answer this in one of the future episodes. So this week's question is from Jojo, and it says, have you seen the anime 86? If so, what do you think? If not, I recommend it. So actually, I have seen a couple of episodes of this one. I think maybe 2 or 3. I'm not too sure if I discussed it on the podcast. Probably not. But I remember this being a dystopian anime about, I guess, like this country, this land that is filled with people who look exactly the same. Like they have all white hair and I believe also blue eyes, and they found out a technology where they can wage war without any casualties using these huge machines. But then it turns out that these machines are actually manned by people who are sort of outcasts, so they don't look like all the rest of the country. And yeah, that's as much as I know about the anime. I've forgotten the synopsis quite a bit, but I do remember it being really interesting. Only I think that I was watching it when the first season was coming out, so I had to watch it every single week, and I am notoriously bad at watching seasonal anime. But yeah, it's definitely one that I want to return to. I know that there's at least one other season of this anime. And also, what else did I want to say? I really liked the music in it. And I was like, oh, this kind of like sounds very familiar. And then it turned out that the person who made that soundtrack was also the composer for Attack on Titan's soundtracks. So that was pretty cool, like being able to recognize that. But yeah, like I said, definitely one of the anime I want to get back to. But there's just so much anime and manga to watch and read. But yeah, thank you so much for your question. And I think we now have reached the end of this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you so much for watching and or listening. A special thank you to my supporters over at Patreon and Ko-fi. Please do take care of yourself, and I hope to see you soon in another episode. Cheers.